Sustainability is a big and complicated topic. We see it in the media almost every day now, but there's often an overwhelming breadth of topics and terms. Understanding all of this is sometimes seen as a specialist or ancillary subject, but I'd argue that it's absolutely relevant to the world of work, whether you're going to be getting into accountancy or arts, bricklaying or business, chemistry or the culinary arts, all the way through to zoology. I'm Richard, I'm a lecturer in finance and sustainability at West Suffolk College. My background is business and I've looked after both of those two subjects. I still sit on several management and advisory boards outside of work. Over the next 15-20 minutes or so, I want to talk about three things. What do we mean by sustainability? What are some of the issues and their impacts? And what is it that we're doing about it? In a way, this is a very miniature version of one of the IEMA courses that you may in fact choose to come and study. So part one, what do we mean by sustainability? The accepted definition now is the triple bottom line. Now this was proposed in the 1970s by René Passet and it was refined in the mid-90s by John Elkington. And what they argue is that there are three strands to sustainability. Financial sustainability is the long-term economic success of a business. Social sustainability is health and safety, well-being, human rights, equality, inclusion and diversity. And environmental sustainability is what we want to look at here today. Now, importantly, these three issues, these three topics interact. We're not looking for a trade-off between them, but what we're looking for is where they all come together. For example, how can organisations possibly improve the environment if they've bankrupted themselves? Without good education, how will businesses thrive? How can they solve the climate crisis? And what kind of jobs will exist on a dead planet? Importantly, why are investors seeking out responsible companies? So let's take a look at some context here. You can see a graph showing the world's population and its rapid growth. It took the whole of human history to 1803 to reach the first billion people on the planet. It then doubled in just 125 years and doubled again in the next 46 years. There are more humans than ever before living on the planet, and our population is still growing, albeit at a reducing rate. Now, all of these people are consuming more, whether that's your energy at home or at work, your transport, travel, deliveries, your food and drink, clothing, houses, internet data, technology, just things. So, what does all of this mean? Well, our population has increased by 4 times in the last century. Humans are consuming more and our total energy demand has increased by 10 times in the last century. And none of this comes free. We're consuming fossil fuels. This is ancient organic matter that we're burning to create energy. That releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, leading to global warming. These are scarce resources. Our oil and gas reserves will effectively be run out in just over 20 years' time. We're overusing our land. We're deforesting vast areas of continents for crops, for growing animal feed and for grazing animals. Indeed, there are just 7 commodities that are responsible for 180 million acres of deforestation in the last 15 years. The number one commodity is meat, or the animal feed. And this is an incredibly inefficient use of our land and energy. Chocolate and coffee are also part of those 7 commodities. One of the problems with deforestation is that once we've cut down the trees, they can no longer absorb the carbon dioxide, and very often they're burnt. They're emitting it into the atmosphere. We know that we're damaging species with our pollution, with pesticides, with our overuse of fertilizers, detergents, and our greenhouse gases. We're disrupting the nutrient cycles, and of course we're extracting more and more minerals for construction and for creation of technology. We're seeing extreme levels of waste. Only 18% of our waste is recycled, and many of that will find its way into watercourses and into the food chain. Even our noise pollution is disruptive to bird and insect life, which disrupts food chains even further. So we've reached part 2, and we'll have a look at some of the issues and the impacts. And importantly, humans rely on our ecosystem services. They're incredibly complicated. We don't fully understand the complexity of these services, but they form the basis of every aspect of human life. Don't believe me? Try giving up food or water or your car or your mobile phone. Now, climate change is often seen as the big part of sustainability, but it really is only one strand. Let's have a look at it. Here's a photograph of our atmosphere. Ordinarily, the sun will warm the planet, and plenty of that heat is reflected back into space. However, as we're putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, they're insulating it. They're almost acting as bubble wrap in your greenhouse, and they're causing the planet to warm up even further. So where do those greenhouse gases come from? Well, generally, they're coming from the burning of fossil fuels. So this might be to create our energy. It might be for our travel, our transport, for deliveries. It could be occurring in agriculture or in manufacturing, whether that's cement or steel, all the way through to food, clothing, and technology. They also come from the decay of our waste. Now, they're not entirely man-made. Volcanoes are a good example of a natural source. But as we put these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the planet is warming up. Take a look at this graph of temperature increases over the last century or so. 19 of the hottest years on record have been this century, and we've only had 20 years this century. We've already reached average temperatures 1.2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial averages. We're heading towards perhaps 3 degrees Celsius, and yet we know that the acceptable limit for humanity is only 1.5 degrees. One of the problems with global warming, with our climate changing, is the effect that it has on the water cycle. So what's happening here? Well, ordinarily we see evaporation from our watercourses, from vegetation, from streams, from the land. The moisture finds its way into the sky where it forms clouds, and then it will fall as precipitation. Once it does that, it will reach the earth, find its way back through the watercourses into our seas and oceans, and the cycle will begin again. However, we're seeing increased temperatures, and we've got a greater urban population. So we've got small areas of very high water demand. We're also seeing greater evaporation. So we're seeing drier land. This is making it difficult to grow crops. We're even finding that buildings are starting to move and crack and subside as the land dries out. Because there's more water in the sky, we're seeing heavier rainfall, heavier snowfall, more violent storms, and this is leading to more dramatic, more regular flooding. Take a look at some of the floods from around the world just last year, and notice that we're seeing some of the warmest, driest regions flooding. It's affecting our region as well. Take a look at East Anglia. These are photographs from the floods we had in December last year. And every single one of these is having a pronounced effect on our region's businesses. I said that the land is drying out. This is having an impact on our food supplies. And so we're finding that it's difficult to graze livestock and grow crops. Indeed, there are 73 million people in Africa facing starvation. That's more than the entire population of the UK. And this is due to our changing weather patterns. It will lead to mass migration. Bear in mind that this is against a backdrop of over a third of the food that we manufacture going to waste. And food production accounts for roughly a fifth of our greenhouse gas emissions. In the period between 2006 and 2010, 60% of Syria's fertile land became desert. 1.5 million people moved into the cities, undoubtedly one of the exacerbations of the Civil War. If temperatures continue to rise, as they're projected to, we anticipate 1.5 billion climate refugees or climate migrants. That's 20% of the world's population. Of course, as the planet warms up, we're seeing ice start to melt. Greenland's ice is melting 4 times faster than we first thought. Now, ice is good at reflecting heat. As it disappears, it is no longer a consequence of climate change, but it is also a cause. There is enough ice that can melt to raise sea levels by over 100 feet. On average, East Anglia sits at between 150 and 200 feet above existing sea levels. We're seeing a worrying effect on our biodiversity and species extinction. Species are disappearing 100 times faster than they would without human intervention. And we rely on these complex ecosystems that we don't truly, fully understand for everything. The global pandemic has also highlighted some of the interactions between the environmental emergency and human health. We've seen an increase in infectious diseases, heat stress, changes to diet, air pollution and mental health. In the UK, we could save 130,000 lives a year by 2040 if we were able to improve air quality. In the US, deaths from COVID were 8% higher in areas of poor air quality. We're discovering 5 new infectious diseases every year, and this is largely due to our encroachment into wild areas. These diseases travel and thrive in these warm areas where previously they couldn't survive. And there's a significant effect on the world's economy as well. Indeed, climate change is the #1 risk to the world's economy. Weather events cost the world $2.5 trillion last decade. That's a 40% increase on the previous decade. We're seeing conventional fuel company share prices amongst some of the worst performing. So this means that if your business isn't sustainable, it does not have a future, you will not get people investing. And yet, we're seeing the cost of solar and wind energy decreasing. It is now lower than conventional energy sources. And this makes sense. There is enough energy from the sun in 1 hour to fulfill the world's annual needs. After all, it's the sun's energy that provides for all life on the planet. And all of the time, this is providing jobs and livelihoods. So we've reached part 3. What are we doing about it? We know that there is not a perfect solution. This is complicated, but that cannot be an excuse for inaction. We're seeing companies greenwash. This means that they're exaggerating or lying about their environmental performance. It's disingenuous, it's dishonest, and it's being called out. We're seeing increased amounts of legislation. Indeed, there are over 1,300 laws in the UK relating to the environment. We have a legal commitment to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. The UK was the first major economy to commit to this. Many others have followed, including China, by 2060. And there are good commercial reasons for taking this seriously. This is about the long-term survival of your business. And that means your supply chains as well. You've got to work to prevent the worst of these actions occurring. And we've got to adapt to what is happening in the world. You wouldn't want to invest in a business that you expect to fail, and this means that investors won't invest in your business. They will, however, invest if you're finding solutions to these problems. It's also about reducing your costs. Any waste of resources is a waste of money, and businesses have got to generate an income in order to thrive and prosper and do greater good into the future. And the third, tertiary reason is about revenue strength. Over 90% of the well-educated millennials would rather buy from brands that have the same ethical stance as they do. Consumers are becoming increasingly aware of greenwash, so there is interest in what your organisation is doing, and you need customers in order to survive. Now, the good news is that we have the tools available to help us through this. We understand the waste hierarchy, environmental gearing, life cycle analyses, renewable power, investor demand. So, every business, every project must ask not only what impacts am I having on the environment and how do I reduce them, nor how should I survive in this changing world, but what can I do to really start making change? So, we know we must change. The moral imperative is clear. There is no longer any doubt about the science. We have a legal commitment to reach net zero emissions by 2050, and there are essential business reasons for change. This is happening, and it must be part of everything that we do now.